The Cape Cod Tunnel, a roadway tunnel meant for the residents of the Cape to bypass the ever-growing congestion of the Bourne and Sagamore bridges. Now, most people believe that the tunnel is nothing more than a legend, that there's no actual evidence to suggest it's real. But what if I told you that the legends are true and that the inhabitants of the Cape only lie about its existence? After all, why should such an infrastructure be made public if it's going to get more traffic? So let me tell you the tale of the Cape Cod Tunnel and finally reveal the secret passage.
The Cape Cod Canal is a stretch of water that splits the Cape from mainland Massachusetts. The Cape was once a connected peninsula, with the canal excavated by man. Well, man-made. Machines were used to dredge it, but we'll get to that in a bit. Proposals for building the canal date all the way back to the early 17th century. There had always been a need to speed up trade, as ships from the south heading towards Plymouth or anywhere north were required to go annoyingly around Massachusetts' flexing arm. In 1717, Jeremiah's Gutter opened as a canal that let boats cut through the Cape in the town of Orleans. No, not Orléans, France, Orleans in Massachusetts. While Jeremiah's Gutter was in use for over 100 years, it still required a considerable distance to reach, as well as being too shallow. In the late 19th century, there were efforts to build a proper canal between Buzzards Bay and Cape Cod Bay. Of course, it came with headaches. The first couple of attempts were done by the Cape Cod Ship Canal Company, who began digging the canal in 1880. But as quick as the work began, so did the money run out. After reorganization, the company restarted its efforts a few years later with some progress, only to again stop operations in 1891. The Boston, Cape Cod, and New York Canal Company, or the BCC-NYCC as I'm confusingly calling it, took a crack at the endeavor. In 1916, they had finally established a working canal, except the canal was rather narrow and shallow, which was challenging for ships to navigate. This resulted in accidents and a poor reputation for the company. So it wasn't until 1940 when the government had bought the canal and made it big for its users. This helped ships to easily maneuver through the waters, which resulted in significantly reducing accidents.
So that's how the canal was made. Wait, what was this video about again? Nah, I forgot. Okay, well then, next stop. How do I get back to the mainland? Oh, right!
When the canal opened in 1916, it already had bridges built in place prior to the opening. A railroad bridge was established in 1910 by Buzzards Bay, while 2 road bridges were completed not long after. The 2 road bridges were the original Bourne and Sagamore bridges, built in 1911 and 1913 respectively. All 3 bridges were designed as bascule bridges, which enabled them to move to allow ships to pass through. But the bridges were part of the navigation problems for boats with how little space there was to go through them. When the federal government took ownership of the canal, they handed the responsibility over to the US Army Corps of Engineers, which I am now told that corpse is pronounced corps because English is a made-up language. Anyway, the Corps sought to improve the canal, which included gathering feedback from shipping companies. An important improvement was to replace the bridges. Instead of being bascule bridges, the railroad bridge was turned into a vertical lift bridge, while the 2 roadway bridges were replaced by taller bridges. The new Bourne and Sagamore bridges opened to the public in June of 1935, and the railroad bridge followed in December that year.
Ships were better at navigating through the canal thanks to these improvements, so there were far less accidents, if any. The Bourne and Sagamore bridges were built to not only be high above the water, but were also widened from 2-lane roadways to 4-lane highways. However, as time progressed, a new problem arose. Oh god, there comes a big truck! Ah!
Throughout most of the year, the highway bridges don't really see a whole lot of traffic moving between the Cape and the mainland, but during the summer months, things get pretty heated. The entire Cape is flooded by waves of tourists who seek a tropical experience without having to spend so much money traveling to actual tropical destinations like
Water country, have some fun.
Like, why should I pay for a highway toll and $60 for the water park when I can get to the Cape for free and pay like $20 for parking at the beach? While beachgoers have to sacrifice some time being stuck in traffic, locals have to share this burden. Residents have always thought it was unfair to be stuck in traffic that isn't caused by them, so the people of the Cape all gathered together in secret to hatch a plan. Construct not one, but multiple tunnels to bypass the bridge traffic. Most of the tunnels would connect from around the edges of the Cape to the mainland, and an additional tunnel to connect Provincetown to Plymouth.
But if the tunnels were built, how come no one from the outside had heard about them? Shouldn't it have been easy to spot massive construction sites and equipment where the tunnels were made? And how was the project even funded? These were the same questions that the locals had asked as well. If people from the outside knew of their secret plan, then the tunnels would attract attention and traffic would get far worse than it already was. Now, nobody knows when these meetings were held, but what I do know is that they happened at a pretty lucky time. Because as talks were going on for the Cape Cod tunnels, a big tunnel project was happening in the city of Boston. You know exactly which one I'm talking about, the North-South Rail Link. No, wait, that's not right. What was it again? Oh, the Big Dig.
The Big Dig had drawn a lot of attention, but what if there was a good reason for this? You see, I theorized that the Big Dig was used as a distraction, a scapegoat from what was going on the Cape. The Big Dig was in the spotlight from the moment it was proposed. This distraction allowed the Cape Cod tunnels to be planned and built easily in secrecy. The equipment and materials used for the Big Dig was certainly shared with the making of the Cape Cod tunnels. Why else would the Big Dig go over budget? And the constant delays of the Big Dig were definitely made to give adequate time for the Cape Cod tunnels to be completed. It's so easy to miss out on a secret project when one can put the blame on a controversial project.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, Max, you're being ridiculous. You're definitely making all this stuff up. Where's the evidence that the tunnels exist? Well, I don't know where they are right now, but that's about to change thanks to this. This is a permit that allows access to the tunnels. Legend says that by attaching this to your vehicle, you'll be teleported to the tunnels and have knowledge of their existence. Without further ado, here goes nothing. Well, I don't actually own a car. I actually walked all the way from Boston to here, believe it or not. So, quite a hike, you know, walked in my unofficial green line boots as it goes. Wait, shouldn't I already teleported? What? So there's no tunnel? Ugh, I spent $3 for nothing? Ugh. But wait, I was still teleported, but to the canal's railroad bridge. Why? What if the real solution to improving traffic on the Cape isn't to have a roadway tunnel? I mean, if everybody on Cape Cod used this tunnel, they'll just generate more traffic. MassDOT is pursuing to replace the Bourne and Sagamore bridges, which includes adding additional lanes, but as we know from induced demand, this is just going to cause worse congestion. So what if the real solution is to provide other modes of transportation for both the locals and tourists?
There are several ways people can move in and out of the Cape, which include cars, planes, and boats. People can also choose to walk or bike along the canal bridges, though they might end up being roadkill. But one mode of travel that has been overlooked is a train. The Cape once had a decent railroad network connecting with the mainland, including trains making way to Provincetown. A series of mergers and acquisitions led to the New Haven owning the tracks on the Cape by the late 19th century. But, much like other American railroads, services were cut as road vehicles became popular, where regular passenger service ceased in 1959. Various operators ran seasonal trains in the following decades, including one from Amtrak called the Cape Codder, but none of them lasted. Not long enough to the 21st century anyway. However, in 2013, the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority partnered with the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority to establish a new seasonal service from Boston to Hyannis dubbed the CapeFlyer. The service operates in the warmer months from Memorial Day weekend to Labor Day weekend with one round-trip train on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, as well as holidays. There are a few stops in between the terminals, including ones based in and near the Cape, so one doesn't have to go all the way to Hyannis if need be.
The CapeFlyer proved successful in its first season, leading to being a permanent seasonal service for the Cape. This is thanks to how popular the train has become, with ridership increasing every year. Since trains have their own dedicated right-of-way, they don't have to be stuck behind traffic, leading to speedier service. And because stations like Hyannis are linked to other transit services, this helps riders to be better connected around the Cape. That's not to say that the service doesn't have some shortcomings, the biggest being how fast trains can operate on the Cape, which is limited to 30 miles per hour. This part alone costs trains an hour to get from Hyannis to Buzzards Bay, where the overall trip time from the Cape to Boston is 2.5 hours, compared to just a little more than an hour of driving without any traffic. So there is some room for improvements for the service, but it's still a far more relaxing and pleasant experience than to be stuck and stressed behind the summer traffic. But what if the CapeFlyer wasn't just a seasonal weekend service? What if to better tackle the Cape Bridge traffic, we can just have a year-round commuter rail service on the Cape? This just in. Man wearing a shirt that only shows half of the shirt. The other half is this. Is it in frame?
Since the CapeFlyer's inception, there have been discussions to have MBTA trains come to the Cape regularly. It's been a serious discussion that the town of Bourne has been paying the MBTA for years to have commuter rail service to the town. Talks involved having Buzzards Bay and Bourne stations included in what is now South Coast Rail. But so far, there hasn't been a whole lot of developments to bring commuter rail service to the Cape. The state is more occupied with the replacement of the Bourne and Sagamore bridges, which involve widening the bridges to accommodate extra lanes in both directions of travel. But again, adding more lanes will just add to traffic onto the Cape, let alone the environmental impacts of adding more vehicles. Ultimately, the real solution isn't to build new bridges or tunnels or widening existing roadways to help ease traffic, because they won't ease traffic at all. The real solution is to provide alternative means of transporting people, especially when the infrastructure for those alternatives already exist.
That was the April Fool's tale of the Cape Cod Tunnel. Now, it's worth mentioning that MassDOT did conduct a study a while ago to see if it's possible to have a tunnel go underneath the Cape Cod Canal. Ultimately, they found that the construction and maintenance costs were too high compared to building a bridge, among many other factors. So, for now at least, there's not going to be any tunnels anywhere near in the future. If you do plan to visit Cape Cod during the summer, I highly recommend riding the CapeFlyer if you're in Boston or somewhere along the southeast, so that you don't have to be stressed about paying attention to the road, being stuck in traffic, and just have a nice, relaxing ride onto the Cape. Thank you as always for watching. Next stop,